Okay, so we've just had the Pokemon Presents for Pokemon Day. I decided I'm going to make a video talking about some of the stuff we saw in it because I think there's some pretty interesting stuff there. I was a pretty big fan of Legends Arceus. In fact, it's my favourite Pokemon game. And, it's the first time, really in a long time, I've ever thought, this is one of my favourite, top 10 favourite games of all time. So, yeah, I was pretty excited about the fact that ZA was coming, not just because of the fact that it is, obviously a continuation of the Legends style, but because of the fact that Pokemon Legends Arceus is based on Sinnoh, which is my favourite region, and Pokemon Legends ZA is based in Kalos, which is my second favourite region. So that's a pretty big win for me. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the other things that were in the presents. There wasn't really much for me to talk about. I don't care much about the mobile games. I haven't played Unite, barely played any of Cafe when it released, never played Sleep, haven't played the TCG game, or any of them really. Pokemon Go is the only one I play. The chance to get a shiny Meloetta is good. I'm looking forward to that, but I only really play Pokemon Go for community days and, getting shinies. That's it. And I only do it very, very occasionally. But as I say, community days and if there's anything special. So nothing really exciting in that portion. Apart from Pokemon Concierge, that was something I watched Pokemon Concierge at the beginning of last year, and I absolutely loved it. It's a fantastic little animated series. A few kind of little issues I had with it, like just some of the designs of the Pokemon. The felt designed Pokemon were gorgeous and so adorable, but the ones that aren't, a bit of a clash, I guess. But other than that, absolutely loved it. Love that we're getting more of it. I was really hoping they'd do more. Wasn't sure we would get any, but we are, so that's great. The other than that, the only two games that really interested me at all were Pokemon Champions and Pokemon ZA. And that's maybe obvious because they are the new games. The rest is just updates, but still, I think that there's a lot, to talk about there. Maybe less so with Pokemon Champions, but I'll start there because I think there's some interesting implications in Pokemon Champions. So firstly, they did show both Mega Evolution and Terrestrialization. And I think that's interesting because I think it shows that they are absolutely willing to mix and match different gimmicks. So Mega Evolution and Terrestrialization are going to interact. Dynamax and Z moves are probably going to come back as well. Now, it has been confirmed that not every Pokemon is going to be available in this game. And I think a lot of people have, thought about this idea before. Basically, a Pokemon a Pokemon, well, kind of like Pokemon Showdown, but a Pokemon Stadium sequel where every Pokemon, every move, every gimmick, every ability is available. And that's great as an idea, and I think everyone was thinking that's possible. The issue, I guess, is that I don't think, this still is a game that needs to be developed, and so, making every single Pokemon available still kind of presents the same problems that it does for example, Scarlet and Violet, or, Sword and Shield, or at least partially. So maybe it was not necessarily realistic to think that all the Pokemon could be available at launch. However, I don't think the fact that it's confirmed that they won't be there for launch means that they won't eventually get there, because this seems very much, the fact that it's on, Switch and mobile devices, seems to me like they are setting this up as the kind of battle hub for basically for forever, indefinitely. And with that in mind, I would imagine eventually everything that's ever been in the main series, they will probably want to put in this game. That might take years, it might do, but I can imagine that's probably what they want to do there. And I think that's acceptable, honestly. If it hasn't got all of the Pokemon now, that's okay, as long as there is a definite commitment to get there eventually. That's my main concern. Not that this is something I'm going to probably use a massive amount. I'm not really into competitive, but I think it's important that they do have that intention. The one thing that I did find a little more intriguing, not necessarily intriguing, because I think the idea of them maybe adding all of the Pokemon is intriguing, but I think at the bottom, some of the little tidbits of this is what you can do with Pokemon Home and how they connect and everything. It said Pokemon champions or Pokemon received in Pokemon Champions cannot be deposited into Pokemon Home. And at first I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. Firstly, just the idea of obtaining Pokemon from Pokemon Champions feels a bit weird, because it seems like it's going to be mostly a battle simulator like Pokemon Stadium and Battle Revolution, and I don't think that they're trying to hide that, because they explicitly showed both of those games in the trailer. So I think that they are making clear that this is a kind of sequel of sorts to that, or a successor to those games. So obtaining Pokemon in those games isn't necessarily something that doesn't happen, but I would have thought for this game it would be a bit more streamlined, and maybe you wouldn't obtain Pokemon from this game. But it seems that you are going to obtain Pokemon from this game, and that those Pokemon are going to not be able to transfer to Pokemon Home. And this comes to what kind of my theory for what this kind of game could have has been for a while, and it's that not only will you be able to transfer your own Pokemon from the games into Pokemon Champions, but also you might be able to just literally make your own Pokemon. Like, no requirements on having to breed or catch or anything like that. You literally just get to say, okay, I want this Pokemon, I want these stats, I want these moves, and so on. So kind of like Pokemon Showdown. I think that could be the direction this game's taking. Obviously, there's very little to go on at this point. They were very vague. But I think that might be a direction that they're going in. And the reason I think that that's, firstly, something they'll do is because there has been a massive thing about the fact that, people, gen Pokemon, and they cheat to get Pokemon. And all they're really doing is, because they still have to, do something that is legal within the realms of the game, but all they're really doing there is saving themselves time. And it's always been the question of, well, if, should someone be essentially penalised for not having the optimal Pokemon because they don't have the time to do it? And then you could bring up the point, well, some people are putting in the time to do it, so should those people be penalised with their time, for not cheating, kind of thing. So it's a really interesting debate. I think having a game where you can literally just create Pokemon and just use them, as they are, I think that would solve that issue for the purposes of competitive. And I think that the reason, therefore, that we might not be able to transfer back to Pokemon Home is because of this idea that, well, that would completely decrease or nullify the worth of any Pokemon. All these shiny Pokemon or these legendaries or mythicals that you see people have, they would have no worth if someone could literally just create the exact same Pokemon and put it into a modern Pokemon game. So I think we are going to be able to obtain Pokemon in Pokemon Champions, but it will be Pokemon that we ourselves create and fine-tune exactly how we want. And as a result, we can create our perfect battle team for the sake of competitive, but we won't be able to transfer those Pokemon into the main Pokemon games. I personally think that's a really, really good way to do it. I think that's actually the perfect way to do it, because I think it kind of hits all of the different things that you need. It means that, competitive, people can have fully competitive teams without having to put hours of work into it. They can obtain whatever Pokemon they want, and that's great. But it also means that it doesn't decrease the value of rare Pokemon. So I think that would be perfect if that's the case. That's obviously a massive, massive amount of speculation, but that is where I can see this going. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much all I had to say about Pokemon Champions. I think it has some really interesting implications when you read between the lines that maybe aren't the case, but it seems like they're the case to me. So I'd be interested to see if that's how it actually goes down. Of course, the big game here is Pokemon Legends ZA, and I'm going to continue calling it ZA because I'm British, and of the generation that still calls it Z. So Pokemon Legends ZA, what do I think of ZA? As a fan of Legends Arceus, I don't necessarily think I'm going to like this game as much, but I still think I'm going to have a great time with it. Obviously, it's too soon to realistically be able to say any of that, but that's the instinct I'm getting from seeing the trailer. I mean, the first thing is the visuals. I don't care really about visuals in games. I play games that are low poly all the time, and I kind of like it that way sometimes. Visuals don't really bother me. I don't have this, thing of, oh, well, if it's a high budget game, it needs to have good visuals. It really doesn't bother me. I think for me, visuals are always a bonus rather than a selling point or a necessity. If a game plays good and is fun, that's what I care about. So I still think the visuals are maybe one of the best looking Pokemon games yet, which isn't a massively high bar, but I think it does look pretty good. But not on the level of, games like Xenoblade or Zelda. But it's definitely not a bad looking game, and I definitely think it's serviceable for what it is. In terms of the setting, the setting being entirely in a city, I think is kind of a genius way to handle it. There was a lot of speculation about what this game could be, about the fact that the setting is Lumio City itself, not just Kalos. So how would they do that? Would it be in the past before Lumio City was actually created? Or what's going to happen? And the answer is no, it's actually modern day. It's just that Pokemon live in the city and there's areas where they will be thriving. And I think that's a cool concept. I think they could do quite a lot with that. I do wonder if it's gonna become a little bit bland in terms of visuals. I'm sure it won't. I'm sure they're gonna have plenty of varied, locations. But I think it's always nice having, wild areas or wild routes, which it would be a shame if we don't get anything like that. But as I said, I'm sure there'll be plenty of variety, and I think the urban setting is going to be a very interesting take for a Legends-style game, or just a Pokemon game in general. One where it has this kind of idea behind it of, catching Pokemon in an action style. I think the next thing I kind of was thinking about is the starters, and this is a weird one because they're using. Pokemon seems to have a real love of Gen 2 and Gen 5. I know people talk about the oversaturation of Gen 1, and that's kind of true, but it makes sense for Gen 1 because Gen 1 was the first generation. It's the generation where, it all started, and most of those Pokemon, a lot of people know. Even just if you think about Pokemon Go and the fact that most of the Gen 1 Pokemon were available during Gen 1, during the early days of the massive popularity of Pokemon Go. Gen 1 getting emphasis isn't weird, really. It might get annoying, but I don't get annoyed by it, but it isn't weird for that to be the case. In fact, even with Gen 2, it's not really that weird. Gen 5 gets way more emphasis than it realistically should. Not that it's a bad generation or that its Pokemon don't deserve love. And it has got more Pokemon than any generation, so it does make sense that more Gen 5 Pokemon get, additional forms and focus than other generations. But the amount of love it gets and the amount of stuff it gets is just not proportional. And I've got a video I'm going to do at some point, probably this year, about this and, about the fact that, well, specifically about the fact that Gen 4 never gets anything, but Gen 5 gets a massive amount of focus. You think about all of the, additional forms and evolutions it's got in you know, in Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus, Scarlet and Violet, it just gets a lot, and I'm not quite sure why. It's always Gen 5. So I think it's a bit weird that they have once again gone for a Gen 5 starter when they had one in Legends Arceus, and, you know, Gen 2 starter when they had Gen 2 starter in Legends Arceus as well. You would have thought they'd have changed up the, you know, the generations a bit, but the weirder thing is the fact that there's two starters from Gen 2. That feels weird. I mean, it does mean now that Typhlosion, all of the Gen 2 starters have got new, you know, some sort of Legends role. Whether they get Mega Evolutions or regional variants is basically impossible to say at this point. We have no idea. Part of me wants to say that they're probably gonna get Mega Evolutions. I think they'll want to go a different way. I think even just the fact that they are using, you know, two Gen 2 starters, and I think is kind of a statement of intent of we just want to do things differently. We don't want to be predictable. So I feel like maybe going Mega Evolution rather than the regional variant that would be expected could be the way that they're going to go, but it's really impossible to say at this point. I would have liked to see another generation starter, even maybe a Gen 9 starter would be cool. But it's not a massive deal. I'm not losing sleep over it. But I just think it's weird, and I just kind of want Gen 4 to get some love, I'm going to be honest. Gen 4 is my favourite generation. I love the Gen 4 Pokemon. Diamond and Legends Arceus are my two favourite games. So, I think Gen 4 has the best Pokemon, in my opinion, and I just really wish that they do something with them, but apparently not. But we'll have to see how that all, you know, pans out. Now, the battle system, that's something I'm not sure about. I really liked Legends Arceus and the action elements it had. Although I was more into the catching than the actual battles with the Pokemon. Not that the, battles with the, what were they called? Noble Pokemon. Not that I didn't enjoy those. I think that they were great for what they were. But the draw to me of Legends Arceus was never the battling, it was the catching. That was the part that was great. The battle system here, it does definitely look like they've changed things. I don't know if they've really got the same kind of thing going on with the catching. It doesn't necessarily look like you're going to have to put as much emphasis on aiming. It does look more like a traditional weaken the Pokemon and, that will make it easier to catch them type deal. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but I'm just not sure I would enjoy it as much as what Legends Arceus had. I'm interested to see what it's like. And the battles, the actual battles with the Pokemon where you're, able to move around, it's, again, much more action-oriented. I appreciated the turn-based combat in Legends Arceus. I think it was cool how they did it. I think it had some interesting ideas. It's not something I was overly attached to. As I said, the battling was never my favourite part of that game. The catching was. And I think this new battle system is, I think, probably going to be a lot more interesting. I'm not sure how I'm going to take to it. I do like action-based games, but not usually RPGs. I like games like Bayonetta, for example. When it comes to action games, that's the kind of thing I like. I mean, I guess you could, include something like Zelda in that. But again, this doesn't look like it's going to have anywhere near as much, fluidity as Zelda or even, Breath of the Wild or something like that. It feels much more like it's going to be, a lot more limited. You're going to have much more limited movement, movement options, but also you're only going to have 4 moves per Pokemon, so it's going to be much more limited. It is still going to probably feel like Pokemon in some ways, but I'm not sure I'm going to take to it. But I'll give it a chance. I mean, it's not dampened my excitement at all. I'm just kind of a little bit cautious about that element of it. But I'm sure it'll be quite good and quite well made, because as I say, Legends Arceus, it had a gimmicky battle system, but it was a good one. And Pokemon's battle system is solid as well. Again, battling has never been my interest in Pokemon. It's always been about collecting, catching, and just interacting with Pokemon. But it's a means to an end at least, and it can be quite fun. So I hope that this is another fun type of battling. What was quite interesting, there was a shot of the player character going across or from one roof to another, and you can see that the way they're doing it is they're actually using the Rotom phone, in the same way as in Scarlet and Violet. If you fall off of a ledge before you hit the ground, Rotom phone will catch you, so that you don't die. And Legends Arceus, that wasn't the case. You would actually take damage if you fell. So it does seem like they've taken some sort of, page out of Scarlet Violet's book on that. Whether or not that will mean that full damage isn't a thing. In fact, I kind of would be inclined to say that full damage probably isn't a thing. It does seem like there's going to be less emphasis on the actual character, the player character being in the action. That's the impression I'm getting. So that might explain why, the Rotom phone is there to stop you from, falling. What it could also indicate is some sort of parkour, and it does look a bit clunky for parkour, I'm going to be honest, but something of that sort where you can, run across buildings and stuff. That would be kind of cool. And that seems to be the kind of thing that you're able to do, even if it is just a way to be able to get across, the tops of buildings. Not necessarily parkour in, as an action concept, but just a way to get across the roofs of buildings would be pretty cool, and that seems to be what we've got here. So that's just kind of something I noticed. The return of Mega Evolution is obviously great. Mega Evolution, I mean, some people aren't as keen on it, but I feel like those people are kind of missing the point. It's never been about the gameplay, it's just always been about the cool factor. Dynamax is awesome in its own way for me. I think the scale it creates is great. Z moves, less so, but I kind of get what they were going for. Terrestrialization is, again, cool enough, and I hear in gameplay terms it's pretty cool, but I'm less into that. It's just less interesting to me. But Mega Evolution has always just been cool. Pokemon surpassing their evolution and just, becoming ultra busted forms of themselves. That's cool, and that's all I care about when it comes to Mega Evolution, I'll be completely frank. I just want it to be cool. And it is cool, and it's cool that it's back. We haven't seen any new Mega Evolutions yet, and we haven't seen any new forms or any new Pokemon yet either. I mean, obviously we saw, Zygarde, the Zygarde cells, I forgot they were Zygarde cores, sorry, as well as Zygarde 10%, which obviously weren't in X and Y, but they are here. We also saw, AZ's Floette, which has never been available, and I imagine won't be necessarily made regularly available here, but maybe at some point will be obtainable. That would be awesome. I'm going to be honest, I'd love that. But, we haven't seen any new Pokemon, and we haven't seen any new Mega Evolutions. I would imagine there will be. I mean, there's going to be new forms of some sort, obviously. But I would imagine we will get new Mega Evolutions as well. I am interested to see, whether or not all of the Pokemon with Mega Evolutions return. Or even if it's, just the Kalos ones, which I could definitely see being the case. I mean, the more the merrier. Mega Evolutions are cool, and the more of them we can get back, it would just be great. But I think, new ones are the priority, I think, for me. Now, I've seen, Lucario. Blaziken is the other one I really want to see. Other than that, there's none that I'm particularly attached to, so I'd just like to see some new ones, really. You've also got, AZ and Floette. That's an interesting one. And I think it's cool that this is definitely a sequel of sorts, because it clearly takes place afterwards. AZ is no longer just a homeless guy roaming around. He's now, he works at a hotel, I think it was, or something like that. Either way, he looks like he's, actually he's fitted out with some new clothes and he's got some sort of role, and I think that's cool. And I think exploring what has happened in the probably years since the events of XY would be really awesome. And I would be really interested to see where they take his character, because this is the first time, I mean, other than obviously the player character in Legends Arceus, but this is going to be, I think, the first time that a character from, the main series is going to also be in a Legends game. Obviously, we've only had one Legends game, but, previously there were characters inspired by characters from past games, but no actual characters, from past games. So I think it'd be really cool if we get more of those, but I think just having AZ is pretty cool. And Floette as well, that's also great. So I'm really interested to see where they take that, what direction. Just a quick little thing about the animations. There wasn't a massive amount to say, I don't think, on that, but I did notice just one little thing. It was just Gyarados. When it's in the water, it just kind of gives this little look. I don't think that's an animation it's had before, but I think we're definitely seeing more and more Pokemon getting more and more animations that are just increasing the depth of them. Scarlet and Violet and Legends Arceus both had, great animations, I think, and definitely helped to make the region and the Pokemon feel a bit more real. I hope that this kind of continues in that direction, and just little snippets like that make me quite hopeful, so we'll have to see. And obviously there was that little bit at the end with the Rotom foam. No idea what that's about, but it's probably some sort of it's probably what the plot is about. I would imagine that the plot is going to revolve around some sort of battle tournament or something, which would be interesting, especially compared to Legends Arceus, where it was very much far removed from that kind of thing. There's not really much to say about that. It's very brief. It seems to be related to the Prism Tower, but we can't really say much at this point. Actually, if you haven't thought about that, considering it's Lumio City, it would probably be likely that we're going to see Clement. I mean, not that that's a massive deal or anything, but it is interesting that he's probably going to turn up, and it'll be interesting to see what because it's probably going to be quite a few years set in the future. So what his new design is going to be, what his new role is, how he's taken the Prism Tower and used it for whatever this battle thing is. Maybe he's even the villain. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see. The last thing that was notable about this Pokémon Presents is the release date. It is late 2025, which I personally thought it would be. But it's good to have the confirmation, because that means, I mean, they're not going to release Generation 10 early next year. I think that's fairly certain. So Generation 10 is probably going to be late 2026, which means they will have plenty of time to work on that. Plenty of time. And that's only a good thing. And it's not like we've already had the year where we missed a release. That was 2024. So it's not like I mean, technically we had 2 years where we haven't had a release, but DLC kind of counts as a release itself. So, and we did get DLC in early 2024, but it was very much, still that 2023 period, where you'd usually get a Pokemon release. But we didn't get anything for, holiday season 2024. But now that we're getting Legends ZA in that probably holiday period, it means that we can probably expect that Gen 10 is coming the year after, and we're kind of past the point where we're not going to have a Pokemon game of a holiday season. So now that we're past that, it's any reservations are gone. We're going to get a Pokemon game this year, a Pokemon game next year. That's great. And I think it's good that we know now that Generation 10 would have had plenty of time, to stew, and almost certainly going to be a Switch 2 game and built with the Switch 2 in mind. And I think that is an exciting opportunity. And I think that maybe I'm being naive, but I think that Gen 10 is probably going to be a massive step up. Legends ZA already looks like it is, taking what Legends Arceus did in some ways and, building on that. And while I think that some of what it's doing is a sideways step, I think it still could be a step up on Legends ZA, as a package. Whether I'll like it as much, I don't know. But I think that there is still a lot of exciting stuff here with ZA. And so if Generation 10 is the same kind of thing, building on what, Scarlet and Violet did, I think we could be in for something pretty awesome. But that's obviously, again, speculation. We don't know. We have no idea what's going to happen with Gen 10. And realistically, we don't know much about Legends ZA as well. But I think the signs are hopeful, and I am very much looking forward to it. Obviously, we still got quite a way to wait, and we will probably hear much more in the future. Maybe a month or two time, we will hear something else. But I am definitely excited. I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I can't wait. And that's basically all I had to say. So we'll just have to wait and see, and I'll see you in the next video. It's been fun doing 2 Pokemon videos in 1 week. Wasn't quite expecting to do this, but yeah. See you next time for probably not a Pokemon video.